Hello my fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to a very special episode as today we discuss my first ever RTT held this weekend with the Leagues of Votann. Now technically this is my second event I ever do in my life, but the first one I attended was something like 5 or 7 years ago when I was but a wee little lad who had no idea what he was doing with his golden custodies. Not that I have any idea now, but I would certainly like to think that I've grown as a player and attended this event with clear purpose and competitive intent. On today's agenda, we'll take a look first at my list, discuss some of the goals I had going into this tournament. We'll take a look at each one of my matchups, so Game 1, Game 2, and Game 3, and then we'll wrap the video up with some kind of list critique or feedback or what I'd like to change going forward. Alright, so here we are with the list. I never thought I'd have to do a video on my own list, staring at it on the screen right now, but let me walk you guys through it. So, kicking things off, we're running 3 Iron champions, each one with an identical loadout of Mass Hammer and Weaverfield Crest, providing the model with the ability to dish out a ton of damage in melee, and have some really nice durability with the 4++. Each one is running their own different enhancement, so we have Grim Demeanor on one, Appraising Glare on another, and a Wayfarer's Grace on the third, meaning he gets back up once per game on a 2+. Each one of these champions is going to be accompanying their own unit of 5-man Hearthguards. Now in terms of my Hearthguard, they're all equipped with the exact same loadout except for the crest. So each Hesir has a hammer, and every Hearthguard inside of the unit has the gauntlets with a Vulcanite Disintegrator. I personally prefer the Vulcanite Disintegrator over the Plasma. I think it's significantly better, especially if you're running a 5-man unit instead, so that if you do disembark from the Landford and you're benefiting from those reroll wounds, you do get access to more devastating wounds, which is really impactful for a unit that has only Strength 5 weaponry. It allows you not only to have a little bit more play into more targets when we compare it to the Plasma, but it also really helps and ensure that you punch up. Now in terms of crest, this is where things differ. 2 of the squads are running Weaverfield Crest, granting the Hesir another 4++, meaning that the units are somewhat resilient, especially to that first high AP value shot that comes through. Not that I make any of the 4++ saves, but it's here just in case one day I do. The third squad of Hearthguard is running a Teleport Crest, and this squad is going to be accompanied by the Wayfarer Grace E-Champ, who is going to be in Deep Strike every single game. The role of this unit is to threaten rapid ingress, whether I need to push in the backfield, land on the Omega objective, or just deter someone on some other primary point. It's a really powerful unit, it hits like a truck, just like all of them do, and it allows me to circumvent the biggest difficulty with running Hearthguard, which of course is their slow movement. At least with a rapid ingress threat, you ensure you get where you need to be, and you deliver a significant amount of damage with the unit. I like to think about it as a reinforcement unit, so if I'm trying to hold down a point or I'm trying to really commit to destroying one, I could either throw this unit in just to add some OC, just to add some damage, which does come up in one of my games here, or conversely I could use it to force an enemy off another objective that might not be as reinforced as he would like to have it, because he's committed his other resources to deal with my other threats. The other 2 squads of Hearthguard that are accompanying Iron champions will be running each inside of their own Hecaton Land Fortress with the preferred loadout of an SP Conversion Beamer and a Twin Bolt Cannon. These units together make up both my Hammer and my Anvil. They do enough damage to deal with stat check armies. They're resilient enough to deal with really high damage targets that are shooting at me, and it allows me to hold primary a lot better and contest it as a result. In terms of utility pieces, I'm running 2 squads of 10 Hearthkin Warriors. So these guys are running the classic loadout with the Thane with a Plasma Pistol, and in terms of the Hearthkin Warriors, we got the a la carte, everything is here for upgrades. We're running a high-las rifle because it's absolutely critical to the functionality of the unit, and we're running a Magna Rail just in case it pops off. I've had it pop off in some of my games. Usually it does nothing, but every now and then it'll do 6 damage to a random vehicle, which is pretty nice. Of course, these guys are going to be split up inside of Sagittars, so I'm running 3 Sagittars here, all with the high las, and I'm going to have one of the 10-man bricks split up inside of the Sagittar and the other 5 starting on the board on my home objective to sticky it. And then for the second unit, I'm going to throw 5 inside of a Sagittar and the other 5 into strategic reserves. This allows me to pressure a different point of the table if I don't want to commit my bikes to it, and I could sneak on to get signals, or I could sneak on to get behind enemy lines or engage on all fronts with a really small pocket of space. The last Sagittar is going to be transporting 5 Chthonian Berserks running the Mauls and the Mole Grenade Launcher. I think it's a unit that people tend to try to play around and respect, even though they're very swingy because they're only ballistic skill 4. So if you do not have anything to judge that you want to throw them at, they're going to absolutely bounce off the target. But if something is judged, which we'll talk a little bit about later, you can do some really good work with the unit, especially for only 100 points. Wrapping the list up, we're running 2 squads of 3 Pioneers. I prefer running them split. I tried running this list with 2 together into a big 6-man brick, and it just didn't really work. I'm not sure if it's because it's not my playstyle. I'm not sure if it's because it doesn't work well with this list archetype, but I just could not get it to actually perform as people have been saying it should be performing, and I much rather just have them split in 2 so that I have more utility, more screening potential, more movement, more activations, and more presence on the board. Of course, for loadouts, we're running the Scanner, the Searchlight, and the Hylas Rotary Cannon. Something I think that has been very helpful for me growing as a player who's trying to become more competitive is setting goals for yourself, whether it's in your practice games or in this case at an event. And so I came into this event for my first RTT, my first tournament ever, with 2 goals. I didn't want to go 0-3, and I wanted to get at least 50 VP in each game. Now I know that win X amount of games isn't a good goal to have per se, but I felt that this would motivate me to play a lot tighter at the event. I was right and I was wrong, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. Alright, so game 1 was into Nids. It was Sights of Power, Chilling Rain, and Hammer of Anvil deployment. I put the map that we were using here on the screen. It was WTC Map 7 Medium, Hammer and Anvil deployment, and I was on one side and my opponent on the other. You'll see the list here in the left-hand side of the screen. It's basically a gigantic monster mash list of pretty elite and durable models. He's got 3 Haruspecs, he has 3 Maliceptors, he has some Exocrines, and he has a Norn Emissary. And of course he has a couple characters with some tech pieces like a Biovore and Gargoyles to help screen. Now, this was my first game ever into Crusher Stampede, and honestly Nids at that in 10th edition. So I think I was going through some army paralysis in this game. I try to always have a general game plan going into every matchup, but my inexperience here was what I believe to be my true downfall. My opponent is an excellent player, one of the best at our LGS, so I did not expect to take a win here at all, but I really would have liked to score better. I ended up getting only 33 points, and he got a perfect game of 100. I honestly do think not knowing what my priority targets should be and how hard his units hit or can be hit really threw me off. My logic going in here was that there's a bunch of bugs on the table. They want to rush me, they want to pin me back by blocking lanes and holding me in combat and probably doing a pretty good amount of damage too. So I figured I'd rush in, I'd push up with my land forts first and meet him in the middle so he couldn't pin me back, while my Sagittars were in the backfield shooting and providing covering fire. I think this was a really bad idea in hindsight. I actually think I should have treated this similar to how I would play against World Eaters, and instead of sending my land forts out first, I should have met them in the middle with my Sagittars and the Warriors inside. This would have allowed me to first block lanes with the Warriors inside the transports once they disembark, and it would have bought my army a round of shooting and scoring while he tries to clear his way through. Additionally, I think this really would have helped him waste time getting through my weaker stuff, which would have allowed my Hearthguard to sit back and deliver the killing blow. Given that this was Sights of Power, I also think I should have tried to get my Hearthguard out behind cover and start scoring points while the rest of my army was delaying the monsters. Because if you think about it, he has no indirect fire, he can't really threaten me, and because of how the lanes are set up, there's pretty clear alleys here going towards each objective, and if I could get myself in a position and then block the access point by throwing stuff in, whether it's my bikes, my warriors, or even my Sagittars if need be, I'm better positioned and I'm better able to protect myself and just keep racking up primary points as long as he can't get on the objective himself. And of course, once he does get close, hopefully I screened him enough and delayed enough time so that I was able to whittle him down with some shooting from both my land forts and my Sagittars, such that my Hearthguard will be able to deliver the killing blow. I think another mistake I made was how I allocated my tokens at the start of the game. Like I said, I really wasn't sure what needed to die first in this list because I never played against any of these units before. So I just put 3 on the Haruspecs because I figured they'd be running up into my face and they're going to be in the front lines anyway. And I put 1 on the Norn. I do think putting it on the Norn was the right move here because I had no idea that she was actually able to grant OC 15 on an objective. So it kind of worked out putting that as one of my priority targets to kill focused fire with my judgment tokens. The mistake I made, however, was not pressuring and trying to kill it early game with my Heartguard unit in Deep Strike. I absolutely should have rapid ingressed in turn 2 when he was exposed and on the objective in no man's land. He was at the top one for reference, and I should have just pushed out from behind ruins and tried to kill it on my turn. I definitely think with the support of a Sagittar, the shooting, and the melee, I would have been able to take down the Norn Emissary, which would have allowed me to control that for sites of power, and he would have had to redistribute his central-based units to try to come push up, which would have helped open up the board a little bit more. Instead, I went for his backfield objective to try to disrupt his Exocrines, which was a really big mistake. I basically just bounced right off them and died the next turn. I think I need to treat these like I would with Doomstalkers and just try to ignore them as much as possible, unless one is super out of position and there's nothing really in my face for my tanks. I'm still not sure if I should have judged the Maliceptors instead, but I will say that the -1 to hit aura is absolutely nuts against our army who hits baseline at BS4. It's kind of pitiful actually, because you simply can't kill anything if you're in its aura, even with tokens, because you're still hitting on 4s. There was one pretty horrible dice roll that happened where I had 5 hits with my Hylas on the Norn, which would be wounding on 2s because she was double judged, and I rolled 4 1s. It was really bad, it was terrible, but we both laughed about it for a while, and ultimately it really would not have made a difference in terms of who won the game, but perhaps it could have helped my points a bit. I will say though, I think this was fully on my positioning and my game plan as a whole. I regret putting my land forts up front first and meeting him head on. I think what I should have done instead, as I said earlier, was send my Sagittars with the warriors, try to screen for my bikes if I have to, and just try to stall as much as possible and rack up primary points. That should have been my play, and then once his things are weakened or below half strength, then I throw my land forts in with the Hearthguard and I try to clean things up. I would really like to try playing into this matchup again after getting practical experience at the event and testing out this new approach, so hopefully I get to play against him again soon. Okay, game 2 was into Drukhari. So this mission was supposed to be take and hold, hidden supplies, search and destroy. I say supposed to be because I'll explain shortly, this was a very cursed game. So the map we were playing on was map 9 medium with search and destroy WTC, and you can see that here on the screen. Now this game was against Drukhari. It's an army that I'm actually quite familiar with thanks to watching a lot of Skari on YouTube, and have since begun recently collecting them myself. So I had a pretty high expectation as to scoring well, taking a win here, because I felt pretty confident in my game plan. I was going to judge the Venoms to ignore the stealth modifier, I was going to push up fast at the land forts to not get pinned, I was going to pop the transports, and then nuke the infantry with the Hearthguard. Now unfortunately, like I said, this game was extremely cursed. So my opponent and I first of all get to the table, and he tells me he's unfamiliar with how Votann work. So I begin explaining some of my stuff while we roll off and deploy. Unfortunately, we both didn't realize because of the multitasking until after we had basically finished deployment that we were missing an objective marker on the table in order to complete the hidden supply, so there were only 5 on the table at this point. Because of this, it created some confusion as to which mission we were supposed to be playing. We knew that game 3 was going to be supply drop, and so we had thought that this mission that we were playing in game 2 was actually supply drop and we were supposed to do take and hold hidden supplies game 3, and that there had just been a mix-up. So we got some confirmation on the table next to us that we were actually wrong, and that this was supposed to be take and hold hidden supplies, and that we were missing an objective marker. By the time we got our objective marker and we were calibrated again to play, we begun losing some time turn 1, and were deployed for a different mission. So we both agreed just resume the game instead of redeploying everything to save time. This meant that we lost some time, we were set up for a different type of mission, but because it was search and destroy, we just figured we wouldn't move anything and would just keep it as is, and now play take and hold instead. Not a super big deal, but of course it could have a bit of an impact. My opponent was a really great guy. He was super funny and an absolute gentleman. He didn't have his army fully painted, and he volunteered to take 10 points off of his VP as a hit, but I felt it would be unsportsmanlike to drop him those points, so I offered to give them instead. I'm really not sure what the proper etiquette is around painted armies at tournaments, as I'm pretty new to them, but I mean, like, we all want to have a good game on an even playing field, so why put your opponent in an artificially disadvantaged position? So I just figured I'd give him the 10 points. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about this. I'm sure there's a lot of differing opinions and controversy surrounding this, but I thought it would be the right move to make. So we start the game off, and I start to suspect that my opponent wasn't 100% comfortable with some of his detachment rules and data sheets. The biggest example I could think of was not knowing he could re-embark within his Venom after the fight phase if he's not in combat and he's within 6 inches. So it's end of his turn 2, he had all his hammer infantry disembarked post shooting and fighting, and he didn't get back inside. It would have been a really easy sweep for me on my turn 3 just to roll in and pick everything up. So I figured surely it must have been a mistake. I asked if he forgot to re-embark, he said he wasn't able to. We went back and forth on this for a little bit, and I told him he could get back in his vehicles, either through Venom's ability or his stratagem, to which he finally looked it up and he did see that that was indeed the case. He asked if he could go back in all his transports, which I did agree to, of course, and then in response, I redid my movement, accounting for the change in board state. All this to say, we lost a lot of time. While people were finishing their games, we were only midway through round 3. Beginning of round 4, the TO says the games are over, we need to wrap up. I felt pretty rushed to finish, and while I was in the lead at this point, I was more focused on just ending the game because people started walking over to the table to start their next one, and we were still playing. At this point, everyone is around our table, we agreed to just talk the rest out. Things were just a little bit too messy at the end with everyone at the table. Redraws were happening on my opponent's side, he was redoing movement. I still have the win, but suddenly he draws capture enemy outpost, redoes a move with some scourges behind the middle, shoots something, he moves on to the objective for 8 VP, and he gets 5 for taking the primary at the end of the game and giving him the win. There wasn't really any time to process the game as we had to pack up like 5 minutes earlier, but I really felt discouraged in this moment. I felt like I played the matchup super well up until the end here, where time became a real constraint. It kind of felt bad because we obviously lost a lot of time at the beginning of the game, and then we had to stop a few times to explain things, which naturally slowed the game down. However, looking back at it, these things do happen, right? There's no chess clock to help mitigate time balance, and more importantly, it's not an excuse for not paying attention at the end of the game and letting the win slip away. I think this is why having a win-loss goal for an event is probably a pretty bad idea, because I got so infatuated with not going 0-3 and trying to win that I let the loss discourage me despite getting a solid and comparable score, and one that was well above my goal of 50 per round. Alright, game 3 into Necrons. This is the actual supply drop Chilling Reign Search and Destroy map we were supposed to play on WTC Map 9 Medium. This game was into Necrons, Hypercrypt, and honestly, I was a little bit relieved to see this matchup. I know a lot of people hate playing against Necrons. I completely understand why. It's just a really annoyingly undercosted arsenal of ridiculously defensive stat lines to get through, but it's a matchup I have the most experience playing into and feel the most comfortable up against with my list. Like, I know from past experience, all I need to kill a Votann is send a land fort with 5 Hearthguard inside. With the reroll wounds and access to sustained hits too, I will absolutely kill the Votann every time after the charge. Same thing with the rates. So I really wasn't too afraid as long as I was able to position myself correctly at the deployment level and was in a position where I was able to quickly get to either one of the objectives depending which one became the Omega, and got there before he was able to relocate his army there using his ability. At this point I was a bit tilted from game 2 and I really didn't want to go 0-3. Plus I was super tired, it was the end of the day, so I just turned off my brain and went with reflex and gut instinct from all of my practice games into this matchup. I judged the rates, I judged the Nightbringer, the Locust Brig, the Immortals. I deployed in the center with 1 land fort pointing to the north objective, and then 1 pointing east, 1 bike in the back for signals, 1 on the long flank to get to the other corner if I draw at turn 1, and I distributed my Sagittars equally across the board. I was pretty happy with this. My deployment allowed me to flexibly commit a brick with a land fort to either of the 2 objectives, and then have the reinforcements come in to support on the Omega. At one point, my opponent had a full Wraith unit on the northern objective from my deployment zone with the Nightbringer very close by. Maybe after losing 2 games in a row and feeling the fatigue, something finally clicked in my head, but I saw everything super clearly in terms of controlling the objective and controlling the board state, while also mitigating my enemy's OC and kiting the Nightbringer. I was suddenly making meaningful and intentional measurements against units to stay out of charge range, while also ensuring I dedicated just enough firepower into the rates to always auto-see them and keep them in that area. It wasn't about killing, it was about stalling. By the time my opponent gave up on that side of the board and he went for the Omega, it was too late. I was already properly set up in screening. I forced him to use a 3-inch deep strike in order to have a chance at getting on it, and with a bunch of Hearthguard there waiting, a horde of 5-man warriors stacking OC, I was able to pick up the Nightbringer and secure the 15 points at the end of the game. So, how did I do in terms of goals? Well, I achieved 1 goal of getting at least 1 win, which is great. I almost got goal 2, but I failed it in my first game, which is unfortunate, but I do think I understand where I went wrong, and I know how I could have gone about it differently to score more effectively. So ultimately, while I would have liked to have one more win in, I really can't complain for my first event, and I'm excited to go to the next one. Alright, so in terms of considerations for my list, I actually don't think I'm going to make any changes for now. During my games, I was considering dropping the Berserks because they just, I don't know, sometimes they just do absolutely nothing. But then in the Necron game, they single-handedly wiped out the entire squad of 6 Locust Destroyers who were double judged. So I think in contexts like this, where they actually do end up connecting to their target opponent, they just shred. They do work at damage 3. It's really, really powerful. And people play around them. They're scared. So if you could stage effectively, get somewhere behind ruins with your Sagittar and effectively guarantee yourself that 8-inch disembark move and then get the charge, you have a really high threat range and you basically guarantee yourself getting in. I was also debating before the event changing some stuff around to bring more Hearthguard in. I was going to bring a 10-man brick. I actually really don't think this is necessary after playing at the event. I never felt in any one of my games that I lacked the damage from my Hearthguard squads to deal with my target threat. I always had enough. Every time the 5-man Hearthguard committed to something, except for the Nids game where I was all over the place, they always did their job. They always got things done. So I really don't think 10 is necessary, honestly. It's going to be overkill. I think the only change I might consider implementing down the line is getting a 3rd land fort in. So potentially dropping a Sagittar, maybe the Berserks if I really want to, because the land forts are just way better than the Sagittars. They're too swingy. Some games they do work, some games they do nothing. You finally get a shot through to connect and it does 1 damage. It's a little bit discouraging, but I still think you kind of have to take that over the missile launcher just because of the potential to spike. It's crazy when it goes off. Like with the Nids game, I got 5 shots through on the Hylas. I unfortunately rolled all 1s to wound, but still, the potential, if all of those went in, could have probably killed the Norn in 1 round. But that said, I kind of like having the Sagittars around because it helps me to bring the Berserks. Otherwise, I'm going to have to take them out of the list and I have less trading pieces available. And I do think the Sagittars are helpful because they can assist with move blocking or just stopping people from moving into lanes, which is pretty good. On that note, I think I need to be more willing to sacrifice my bikes when need be. The bikes were okay in this event. They didn't really do anything crazy. They did their job of scoring objectives if they had to. I think the most impactful they were was definitely inside of the Necron game, where I positioned myself effectively to be able to basically be anywhere on the board and provide supporting fire to my other units. This was pretty good. I used them to stack bodies on the objective so that I was actually able to out-OC the Catan from behind the wall, which was really helpful. The only other thing that felt a little bit weird was 20 warriors. I think in the ideal world, I would want 15, which sadly is impossible. But I do think 10 is too few and 20 is too many. 15 just feels like the perfect number. I forgot to bring them in one of my games from reserves. There's just not always a point in every game where you say, yeah, okay, I need to bring this thing in. Whether it's because you draw some cards early that require you to have to go behind enemy lines and you're just naturally there because you're pushing, or whether it's because there's nowhere to actually bring them in and they fall back onto your home objective area and your deployment zone. It just kind of feels like a bit of a waste in some games. In some of my practice games, they were pretty key actually to securing wins or draws. Against World Eaters, for instance, I was able to pressure from the backfield and just walk up onto an objective, which was pretty good. So ideally 15, maybe when the Jaegers come out and we're able to sub those in for warriors, maybe you could take them in squads of 5, that would be ideal. That way I get my 15 bodies that I could throw around the board that are cheap and have good OC. But for now, I think I'll probably try running 20, and if need be, maybe I'll drop them for an extra squad of bikes. With that said, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video with something a little bit different. If you guys enjoyed this content, let me know. I'll make sure to make another video at the next event I go to. As always, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.